Judging from the tendency and effect of his arguments, an atheist does not appear positively to refuse that a God may be. His verdict on the doctrine of God is only that it is not proven. It is not that it is disproven. He is but an atheist. He is not an anti-theist. Some like to say that you shouldn't talk about religion and politics. Now, in my case, these are some of my favorite subjects. I find them very interesting. I suppose I find human behavior fascinating, and, politics and religion both fall well under that umbrella of how people behave, how people behave corporately, how they behave at an individual level. And if you're fascinated by human behavior, why wouldn't you want to talk about these things? If you sat and thought about it for a while, what has a bigger impact on human behavior than our political beliefs and also our spiritual beliefs? Why would that be a taboo topic? So the last video I uploaded was titled No Atheists in Foxholes. And actually, by my channel's standards, it did fairly well. It's not my most viewed video, but it's the video that, at least recently, has gotten me the most subscribers. In fact, this video just put me over 200 subscribers. And it also got a lot of engagement. There's a fair amount of people that commented on it, and I'm always happy to get comments. I prefer that they're civil and thoughtful. Even if you don't agree with me, that kind of feedback is always appreciated. Time permitting, if you leave a good, thoughtful comment on my video, first of all, I'm going to read it, and I'll probably respond to it. In this case, I got several comments, and a lot of them are along the same lines, so rather than respond to each one individually, I'm just going to make a video responding to the bulk of them. So I'll start with the low-hanging fruit. I seem to get a number of comments from people that it doesn't appear that they actually watched the video. They merely just read the title and responded to that. For the title of this video, I called it No Atheists in Foxholes, which is basically a quote that goes around from time to time, that there's no atheist in foxholes. I used that title, admittedly, because it was probably a little provocative. But as a wise man once said, always and never are two words you should always remember to never use. Point being, it's relatively easy to disprove an absolute statement often. So if you say no atheist in foxholes, well, I'm sure you can find an example of an atheist in a foxhole. In fact, there's probably plenty of examples of them. And actually, in the first 20 seconds of the video, I say as much. I say, I cite the quote, and then I say, this is literally false. This statement is literally false, and it's probably pretty easy to disprove that. All you have to do is find one atheist who served in an active combat role, and wow, disproven. And while this statement is literally false, I go on to explain that there is a truth behind it. There's a sentiment behind it that is true, and that's that, in tough times, that's often when people call on God, or they try to get closer to God. I believe that statement very much is true. I mean, that's, when people get diagnosed with cancer, that's when they start to pray. When people are, in some sense, we're always in mortal peril. I mean, we could die of a stroke at any moment. We could step the wrong way off the curb, fall in the street, and get hit by a bus at nearly any moment. The mortality is always not far away from us. But there are times when it's more apparent. Like if you were in an active combat role, obviously death is all around you. And when people are in those types of situations, that's when they tend to get more religious. So my argument isn't that there isn't plenty of exceptions to the rule. My argument is that as a general rule, it's in difficult times that people draw near to God. And the opposite is true as well. And this is what I get into in the 20-minute video that I uploaded. It's that men draw near to God during hard times, and they often forget about him once the good times roll in. So let's get into some of these comments. So this comes from a user named Wes. He says, bullshit. Here is one atheist that was in foxhole in foxhole. I think he meant to put a comma here. So it was in a foxhole, dozens of firefights, mortar and rocket attacks, been in hospital for a heart attack, 3 heart surgeries, many days in intensive care, never once called on the magic man in the sky. The Bible is a fan-fairy story for one version of the invisible man. Well, in good faith, I'll just take for granted that everything this guy is saying is true. I'm not sure what country the user's from, but hey, if you're on my country's team, thank you for your service. But unfortunately, you're arguing with a straw man, because I literally said in the first 20 seconds of the video that the statement, the absolute statement that there are no atheists in foxholes is demonstrably false. If you don't agree with the title, and you're just reacting to that and just saw this title and decided to click on the video and respond to it, that's okay. Maybe I should have chosen a better title. But at the same token, if you had bothered to listen to the first 2 minutes of the video, you would know that this wasn't my argument. So this one I actually did respond to in kind, but I don't know. I liked my response, or I wouldn't have posted it, so I'll repeat it in this video. So Robert Workman writes, "You're born atheist. If you stay away from the groomers, you will live a better life." So I guess I read his comment as to say that atheism is your natural state, and if you stay away from the groomers, people trying to proselytize you into a religion, you'll have a better life. I don't want to put words in the guy's mouth, but that's how I read that comment. So I write back, I'd agree with the first part if you changed atheist to agnostic, because I think that much is true. I think when you're 2 years old, you just don't have much knowledge of anything, let alone knowledge of God. And it's not like you've wrestled with the idea and come to the conclusion that there is no God when you're 2. You literally don't have an opinion because you haven't been around long enough to think about it. So I do think this statement is false. I think it's false to say you're born atheist, but I would accept if you said you're born agnostic. And I say as much. You could be said to be born agnostic. We are also born illiterate and without even knowing a language. I wouldn't suggest staying that way, and I don't think my community or society... I don't think of my community or society as groomers trying to brainwash me into being able to read and speak English. So in short, we absorb a lot of things from the culture around us, and one of those is language, and certainly one of those is religion, religious dogma of one form or another. And some atheists will argue, well, see, that just proves that people are brought up to believe a certain tradition, and they like to argue that, well, I'm a Christian, for example. I was born into a community where Christianity was the predominant religion. They'll say, well, if you were born in a Muslim country, you'd be a good Muslim. All right, well, to a point that's true, but it's also true that a lot of people dig into these things and wrestle with these ideas for themselves and ultimately come to their own conclusions. So yeah, I was raised in a Christian community, and I still happen to be Christian. But I was raised in a specific sect of Christianity, a specific type of church, and I don't have any great allegiance to that sect. In fact, I consider myself more non-denominational than anything. And I doubt there's a preacher that I agree with on everything, because the Bible is a complex document, and it can be interpreted different ways. So different people can come to different, within reason, you can come to different reasonable conclusions on different teachings. Much the same way, different people can read the Constitution and interpret it in different ways. So I'm always open to, I have my core beliefs, but where the Bible isn't really clear or doesn't draw a real hard line on a subject, well, then I'm more open to, different interpretations. Sort of went off on a tangent here, but that same sword, atheists like to use this, but that same sword could be used against them. I mean, are you just an atheist because you were born in a secular household and you were born in a community that was not that religious, or maybe there was a lot of atheists in your community? Are you that way because you went to a college where religion was scoffed at and it was easier to fit in if you just identified as atheist? So you can make that argument that people are just whatever religious tradition they have is just something they adopted from culture around them. But the same could be said of an atheist. Are you an atheist because all your friends happen to be atheists, and the professors you look up to in college were atheists, and you listen to Richard Dawkins or Neil deGrasse Tyson speak on the subject and you just adopted their ideas without really thinking about them for yourself. I mean, the same argument could be made against you. Kind of went off on a tangent, but that's sort of my point there. I'll continue on with the rest of my response. I think in the last part, you assume the plot. When he says, if you just stay away from the groomers, if you never get religious, you'll just live a better life. Well, that assumes that you're right. Obviously, you wouldn't hold the position if you didn't think it was right, but you're not even allowing for the possibility that you could be wrong. Like, if there is a God to know and you don't ever know him, is that really the best life you could live? And I go on to say, I suppose, if there is no God, I suppose that does offer men a kind of freedom. However, a purely materialistic view of reality can often tempt people into a state of nihilism and or hedonism, and this can lead to a sense of purposelessness and ultimately an unfulfilled life. If rejection of God and all that comes along with that leads you to a place where of nihilism, where nothing really matters, nothing you do really matters in the end, because it's all just gonna be incinerated when the sun explodes anyway. And along with that, I mean, if that's your view, well then what do you do on this earth? Well, you just purely try to live in the moment and pursue earthly pleasures, and that might keep you satisfied for a while, but ultimately a lot of people find that doesn't lead to a very fulfilled life. Now, I suppose you could counter the argument by saying, well, you don't need God to put meaning and purpose in your life. You can do that some other way. And that very well might be true, but a lot of people find meaning in their life through their relationship with God. I go on to say, debating the existence of God is not useless. If nothing else, it challenges men to think deeply and wrestle with ideas. Ultimately, neither God's existence nor lack thereof is anything any mortal can demonstrate empirically. The agnostic can say, I just don't know, but it takes faith to believe he exists, and it takes a kind of faith to believe that he doesn't exist. I'm a man in my 40s, and I've been talking and debating religion and politics since I was a teenager. So the odds are, if you're just decided you were an atheist 5 minutes ago, odds are I know your arguments better than you do because I've heard them all before. I've heard your arguments, I've heard the theist counter arguments to your arguments. I've heard your counter arguments to their arguments, and back and forth. The theist can say, well, if there's no God, where did all the matter and energy in the universe come from? Where did it spring forth? There must be a first cause, and that must have something to do with God. And the atheist counters, well, where did God come from? And you can have these debates, and it's not useless. Like I said, it does get you to think and question. It's good to find people that are smart, that have a different opinion than you, and that can challenge you, because it forces you to be a little more humble. It forces you to question your own arguments before you spew them on other people. I constantly try to make sure that what I'm saying is true so that it isn't easily disproven and thrown back in my face. So there is a usefulness in the debate. However, at the end of the day, if God exists, he exists outside of his creation, right? If God created the universe, he exists on a plane that's outside of the created universe. The best we can do with science is test things within the scope of the creation. We can build laboratories, and we can bring in chemical A, and we can combine it with chemical B, and we can observe what happens, and we can do this in different circumstances and different environments to try to really discover the properties of chemical A and chemical B and how they interact with each other. We can look up at the sky, and we can observe the motions of the stars. We can observe the light of the stars, and we can deduce all sorts of reasonable theories about how all this stuff works. But God is beyond all that. So you can't put God in a laboratory and test him and prove anything about him empirically. So I think my last sentence in this paragraph is completely apt. The agnostic can say, I just don't know. I'm without knowledge. It doesn't take any faith to say, I don't know. But if you say you believe in God, well, that does take a certain kind of faith. Now, you can have really good, compelling reasons, and you could, have a ton of life experiences that personally convicted you that, convinced you that God exists. And I would say, at 40 plus years old, I've had those. That's why I believe. And that's basically what I get into in the next paragraph. So for my part, I suppose I believe from my life experiences. I've seen and experienced too much to chalk it all up to coincidence. Now, me telling you of my experiences probably isn't enough to convince you, and perhaps it shouldn't be. You haven't walked in my shoes, you haven't seen through my eyes. I would say test it out for yourself. Like I said before, I'm not new to the whole atheist versus theist debate. And there's a lot of interesting argumentation to be had there, to be hashed out. But ultimately, like, you just got to jump in the water at some point and see if you can swim. Like, the real way to test for yourself whether or not God is true is to, in my opinion, it's to read the Bible, start with the New Testament, start with the gospel books, the teachings of Christ. Now, it'll make more sense to you if you have the whole biblical narrative, like if you read the Old Testament too, but you can find a lot of Christ's teachings, directly in the New Testament, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's the books that record Christ's ministry on earth. And you can read his teachings, and you can wrestle with them and try to understand them, and then you can apply those to your life and see what happens. Test for yourself whether there's truth behind his teachings or not. And if you start to see that there is, and you keep going, and eventually maybe that will lead you to where I am, where you accept that it's true. I would say test these things for yourself. I did that, and I found a lot of wisdom in these teachings. I could say it's the same for the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament. Whether you believe it's divinely inspired or not, there is a lot of wise sayings in the book of Proverbs. For example, one of my favorite ones is, he that answers a matter before he hears it, it is a shame to him. It's foolishness. Different translations say it in different ways, but basically a guy that judges a matter before he listens to it and hears the whole story. The book of Proverbs says that man is foolish. Whether or not that saying is divinely inspired or not, it's very true, and I run into that all the time. It's one of the things that annoys me the most about people is when they judge matters before they take the time to hear the whole story, to hear all sides, and to make a sound judgment on something. The Bible's full of those types of insights, and whether you believe it or not, it's a worthwhile read, in my opinion. But anyway, to wrap this one up, lastly, if God does exist and is the supreme consciousness that created and ordered the universe, knowing him and having fellowship with him would probably be the most fulfilling thing there is to do. So my advice would be have an open mind and explore such things for yourself. Moving on to more comments. Wouldn't that mean that all foxholes are filled with believers in God, suggesting that people who believe in God are actively responsible for war? Well, no, and that's not what that suggests. But again, if you actually watched the video, you would be able to respond to the arguments that I actually made. And this user actually sort of stole my thunder. He says, not necessarily, responding to this guy, he says, not necessarily. People in foxholes don't start wars. Yeah, the rank and file conscripted man who got drafted to go fight in a war, and is basically his government's essentially holding a gun over his head and demanding of him either you go out and fight this war or we're going to throw you in jail or something to that effect. In certain regimes, it was even more brutal to that. If the government drafted you in Stalinist Russia, you either went and fought in the front line or they just put a bullet in you right there. So yeah, you can't really blame the rank and file conscripted man. And I would say you really can't even blame the enlisted men, because a lot of times when a major conflict breaks out, people enlist just because they want to avoid being drafted. Like during World War II in the United States, once Pearl Harbor was bombed and we were going to war, a lot of people would enlist because they wanted to avoid the draft. If they enlisted, they had a little more choice as to what branch of the service they went into. And because they came forward and volunteered, generally their superiors would look favorably upon that and give them a little more latitude in deciding what branch of service they were going to serve in, or in what capacity in the conflict they were going to serve. As where if you just waited till you got drafted, it's likely they'd throw you in the front lines in some trench, or Maybe you would be the tail gunner on a B-17, where you're likely to be the first guy that they shoot at when enemy fighters are trying to shoot you down. So non-believers and believers alike get forced into combat roles from time to time. I'm not trying to put words in this guy's mouth, but I have heard atheists argue often, well, religion is the cause of all the wars that there ever was. And that's as demonstrably false as me saying there are no atheists in foxholes. I'm not an expert on the history of human conflict, but I have read enough history to know that probably the biggest cause of human conflict is disputes over scarce resources. One tribe might get into conflict with a neighboring tribe because there's a dispute over who gets what grazing lands for their livestock, or who gets, or maybe a certain patch of soil is more fertile, and people fight over who gets to control that. In recent history, in the last few decades, obviously there's been a lot of conflicts over who gets to control the countries with all the oil underneath them. I would argue that a root cause to a lot of the conflicts in the Middle East, for example, ultimately boil down to is there's enough interested parties that don't want to see the world's largest oil supply fall under control of one of those parties. Like during the Cold War, you had the Allies, and the dominant force behind the West was the United States, and on the other side you had the Soviet Union. At one time, in the 1950s, for example, there was a democratically elected government in Iran that was very left-leaning, very socialist. They nationalized the oil industry, and because of that, they were probably looked at by the U.S. and the British as being too aligned with the Soviet Union. So our intelligence services, both the British intelligence and the American CIA, actually successfully undermined this democratically elected government, got them ousted, installed the Shah, who was something of an autocrat, something of a dictator, but he was a pro-Western dictator, so we backed him for about 25 years until he got ousted. And the Iranians haven't liked us ever since. And you could say there's a similar story in Iraq. Of course, the first Gulf War was fought over. Iraq invaded Kuwait, and they did so to get control of their oil field. Why else would you want to invade Kuwait? And the Allies responded by pushing them right back out. And then the second Gulf War, was it fought over religion, or was it fought over resources? Now, all that said, when you want to mobilize a population to a war effort, you need to tell them a good story. You need to convince the farmers and factory workers in one country to put down their sickles and their hammers and to take up arms and go fight the people, the farmers and factory workers in another country. And who the hell wants to do that unless they have a really, really good reason? And that's where propaganda comes in, and that's where the art of storytelling and convincing people that the other side is the devil and we need to defeat them. And I suppose in that sense, religion is sometimes used. If they worship a different god, well, then it's a point of contention where you can arouse your population against this population with a different religious tradition. But it's also often ideological. What was the justification during the Iraq War, for example? Oh, these people hate us for their freedom. They're trying to get weapons of mass destruction, and they're going to probably use them against us. So I would agree that sometimes religion is used as a tool to sort of like turn to get a population behind a war effort, but it's certainly not the only story that's told. I mean, ideology itself is often a tool. Like they hate us for our freedom. We need to spread democracy around the world by the barrel of a gun and with bombs and stuff. What stories did the Soviet leaders tell the population to get them behind war efforts? Well, they were building a workers' utopia, and they needed to spread that around the world, liberate the workers of the world. That was sort of the Marxist socialist propaganda. That's how they got their farmers and factory workers to sign on to a war effort. in World War II, what was the motivation for the fascists in Germany? What was the motivation for the Nazis? Well, it wasn't religion very much. It was mostly, the Germans had felt that they had been humiliated and mistreated at the end of World War. Basically the Allies decided to blame Germany solely for the cause of World War One, and they chose to punish them very severely. Now, the Germans probably were in part responsible, but there was plenty of responsibility for World War One to go around. Let me just say that. And Hitler just leaned on that and used that to get the population behind them. If you tell a proud people that were humbled at the end of a war that they got screwed over and you're going to set things right, well, that's going to get people to follow you. And there was a lot of scapegoating of different people. Obviously, the Jewish population in and around Germany were scapegoated. He sort of played on people's natural envies and distrust of others to consolidate power behind himself. And in either case, none of these people could be said to be diligent followers of the teachings of Christ. The gospel message is all about forgiveness. Jesus wasn't a warlord; he was a healer. He taught his disciples that those that live by the sword die by the sword. Not exactly good war propaganda if you want to get your population to go fight some other population. He taught a message of forgiveness and charity towards your fellow man, trying to love your enemies, to the extent that you can. Because, hey, maybe if you spend more time loving your enemies, you'll have less of them over time. The Nazis certainly weren't following Christ when they were marching over Europe. They were following some other god, as was the Soviets. The Soviets were notoriously secular, largely because they wanted to displace God because they wanted to set themselves up in his place. They wanted to build statues and monuments to themselves and be the supreme leader that nobody questioned. And, well, in that case, I would assume men like Stalin saw God as competition in that realm. I'm not trying to put words in this commenter's mouth because he didn't specifically say that, but I have heard that argument from other atheists, and I think it's just a childish understanding of both human nature and the history of human conflict. So, Mike without an E, I think that's what that is. Just because you're a loser with full knowledge your beliefs are lies, don't tar atheist with your hypocritical projection brush. Now, are you sure it's I that engaged in the projection here? But let's dissect this comment a little bit. Just because you're a loser, so insult off the bat. With full knowledge your beliefs are lies, so that would be called mind reading. He's supposing that he knows that I know that my beliefs are lies. In reality, how could you possibly know that? Really, if anybody could know that, it would be me. So only I know whether I truly believe the things that I say or whether I don't. He's essentially just mind reading. What is he basing that on? Honestly, I don't even know what he's responding to. I sort of suspect that he just read the title of this video, No Atheist in Foxholes, didn't like it, and decided to respond to it. I suspect that he didn't even watch the video because it's not reflected in his comment. He's not actually addressing anything I talked about in the video. Don't tar atheist with your hypocritical projection brush. Well, everybody has the capacity to be a hypocrite, including people that identify as atheist, and everybody has the capacity to engage in projection, than to just rather than confront flaws in their own character, they project them onto other people. And I dare ask, is it possible that perhaps some of your more belligerent anti-theist, they're really just projecting onto, their stereotype of a religious person, flaws that they probably exhibit themselves? Would that explain some of the unwarranted anger that they have against just random religious people, like me, for example? Why do I get all these hateful comments from atheists on my videos? So this one, this was actually from a different. I made a video called "What Will You Say on Judgment Day" a while back, and this is some of the comments that I got on those. I am not a cannibal, and neither were my ancestors. Now, I might be able to come up with a theory about what he might be talking about, but this comment's a little bit cryptic, is it not? So I really didn't know how to respond to that, so I just said, I like ribeyes. Not sure what my ancestors ate. They were before my time. And to be fair, I don't even know if this guy's an atheist. Like, I have no idea what his comment was trying to get at. But here's a commenter that was a little more I could get a read on. He starts, his opening comment is, "You have asked, and I shall answer. Non servam," which means I will not serve in Latin. So to be clear, he obviously read the title of the video, which is What Will You Say on Judgment Day, and this compelled him to click on the video and write a comment, and it is, "You have asked, and I shall answer. Non servam." I mean, I'm supposing this is what he's hinting at, but in sort of an angelic mythology, that when Satan was rebelling in heaven, this was supposedly his chant, "Non servam," I will not serve. Honestly, like, I don't even really know what to do with this. Okay, kid, you're rebelling against everything, including God. Good for you. So I try to write back in a cordial manner and sort of try to prod this, I'm assuming, a younger person, to broaden their perspective a little bit. So I write back, every man inevitably finds himself in service to a master of one sort or another. To the extent that free will exists, it merely allows us to have some choice over whom or what that master might be. Every choice entails trade-offs, therefore choices of great consequence should be made carefully. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, it is true. Like, even if you reject religion, you reject God, people inevitably, they make something their God, even if you lack a supernatural belief. What do I mean by that? Well, we all have value system, and we all have, it's arranged in a hierarchy. Well, whatever you put at the top of that hierarchy might as well be called your God, because everything else is going to come into service to that, whatever that thing is that you make, your highest value. So, for example, some people make money their God, and pursuit of money their God, and this perverts all their other values. If money's your God, well, then you're going to be, you're going to put that higher than the truth, so you're going to be willing to lie to get money. You're going to put that higher than the rights of other people, so maybe you're willing to cheat and steal to get more money. And, money's just one example. Some people probably put lust there, and that's sort of a wicked master that's going to lead you to places you probably don't want to be. People that are addicted to drugs, I mean, they made drugs their God. Probably not by their own choice, but at least eventually not. I mean, people choose to dabble, and if they dabble with the wrong substance, they get addicted to it, and now it takes over their life, and, heroin is now their God, whether they like the fact or not. Just for an example. So there's all sorts of things that you can put in the place that you should be putting, the true God, the living God of creation. It could lead you down the primrose path if you're not careful. So that's what I meant with this comment. So how does he respond? "You speak as a slave. The greatest choice of all is your choice to be free. There are in the world men that are free. Clearly not you. My initial point remains. I will not serve." Okay, at this point, I'm starting to get a little bit annoyed. Like, here I am trying to have a meaningful conversation, and this is what I get back. So I reply, "You speak as one who has deluded oneself into believing that merely declaring yourself free makes it so. All men are slaves to their biology. One must breathe, eat, drink, defecate, and sleep in order to survive. Men are social creatures. They need a tribe to survive. In fact, their long-term livelihood depends on serving others well within their community. You may have some choice in how you eat or who you socialize with, but the imperative persists. Many men are slaves to their own vices, often against their own will and to their own detriment. I am a fan of liberty within the scope of what is both possible and prudent. There are no solutions that make you perfectly free. There are only trade-offs. Trade wisely. Again, solid advice. I mean, we all inevitably end up in service to something. If you're working for yourself, well, you're serving your customers, and if you're not serving your customers well, you're not going to be self-employed for very long. If you work for somebody else, well, then you're in service to your employer, and that's how you derive your living. So we're all in service to something, and actually being a very good servant in whatever capacity you're in often is your ticket to more freedom in life, ironically. But think about it. If you're a really good businessman and you're really good at serving your customers, well, then you're going to be more successful, and you'll have more money with which to do with as you please. Again, I think that's a perfectly reasonable take. And what do I get back in the comment section? So that's the kind of stuff that I deal with from, your more juvenile atheist. And a lot of times I suspect, based on their comments, that they didn't even watch the video. They're just, they read the title and they maybe read the thumbnail and, oh, this is something religious. I'm just going to click on this and be obnoxious in the comments section. The thing is, I actually invite thoughtful criticism. Towards the beginning of this video, I brought up the fact that, religion and politics are often taboo topics for people. They're topics they don't like to discuss, at least not outside of the circles of people that already agree with them. And I sort of lamented that fact and wondered why that is. Well, perhaps I know why that is. I suspect the reason that is because it makes some people, actually a lot of people, very uncomfortable. And ultimately, that discomfort comes from a genuine lack of confidence in their worldview. They're so afraid that if the wrong information is thrown at them, that everything they think they know might start to unravel, and that makes them very uncomfortable. Now, I don't think they've all pieced that together as a coherent thought, but that's why they get anxious when these topics come up. And they're confronted by ideas and arguments from people that don't share their worldview. So they'd rather just sweep these subjects under the rug and only bring them out in the right company, in the company of people that already think more or less just like they do on the subject. See, I don't have that problem. Maybe I did when I was much, much younger and less confident, but then I sort of did deep dives on all the subjects that interested me and wrestled with them long enough to have enough confidence in my worldview that I actually invite criticism. See, that's the thing. Like, I was actually disappointed that there wasn't better comments that might potentially challenge my ideas. Because what's the worst that's going to happen? One of two things will happen. Either someone will offer a really thoughtful critique of my worldview, and I'll examine it. And perhaps upon examination, I'll find out where he overstated his case, or I'll find, what the details that he didn't account for. And I'll think to myself, well, this was a good effort, but here's what he's missing, and my worldview will come out unscathed. That's one possibility. Or the other possibility is he presents a solid argument against some aspect of my worldview, and I'll examine it, and I won't be able to find fault with it. And it actually challenge the limits of my knowledge, and I'll have to change my worldview a little bit to account for this new information or this new argument that I've never heard before. So in either case, it's a win for me. I'm either going to come out the other side with more confidence in my worldview, or I'm going to come out on the other side with a worldview that adjusts for more information and is probably more accurate. So with that said, if you're going to comment on my video, leave an interesting one. Leave a thoughtful one. I'll more than likely read it, and maybe I might even respond to it like I did with these. That said, some of these comments were very trollish. In the future, yeah, if you leave just a slew of insults and whatnot, I'm not gonna bother responding to it. But maybe I'll post a link to this video on it. I'm not going to bother responding to that. If there's no substance to your comment, why should I waste my time with